Okay, folks, welcome to the next AgileLabs webinar. My atomic clock says that it is just time to start. And today I'm more than happy to welcome David Anderson, who created Kanban method. And he's going to share with us some 10 mistakes you can do when starting with Kanban, and also how to avoid it. David, thank you very much for dedicate your time and attention that you will be with us and share your wide experience. I am more than happy for that, and thank you. And guys, for you, there is a ask to just mute for the mix, and if later on, or if David will, I don't know what the flow of the meeting will be, but anyway, there will be space to ask questions, get some answers. So later on, if you ask, if it's possible, please turn the camera on, because it is always better to see each other instead of just letters or avatars. So that's it from technical perspective. And once again, welcome everybody. Thanks you once again, David. And let's rock and roll.
All right, thank you, Paul. Nice to be here, and I need to say thanks to Anya Radzikowska, who has helped me quite a bit with tonight's presentation. Figure out the technology here. Okay, hopefully you're all seeing this.
Yes, confirmed.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so Pavel asked me to talk about 10 commonly recurring mistakes when you start with Kanban. And therefore, there is an assumption here that you have some familiarity with the Kanban method, and perhaps you're already using it in some way or another. So forgive me if the presentation makes some assumptions about what you might already know. Okay, so the first mistake that we make, and these are not in a particular order of priority, I think I'll make that point, that the first of these mistakes that we see very commonly is overreaching. And this is primarily a situation that occurs when we have some agile coach, some consultant, someone who's read a lot of books and knows a lot of stuff, and they feel some pressure perhaps to be the smartest guy in the room, and to justify the fee that they're charging. And as a consequence, they often overlook the fact the organization they're working with is quite an immature culture. And the result is that they prescribe things that the organization isn't ready for, the people are not ready for it. And the result usually is they choke on it. It's like trying to eat too much, choke on it, and they spit it out. So the result usually is a failure, a regression back to what they were doing before, and quite possibly the consultant, the agile coach, they get fired. So we have a solution to this, which is based in the Kanban maturity model. The whole idea of understanding the situation you're in, the organization and its leadership, and the readiness for particular Kanban practices and patterns of practices. And if you detect that an organization is, say, maturity level 1, you shouldn't be recommending things that are level 4 on the model. Level 1 or 1 to 2 transition, perhaps, that's fine, but don't overreach. One step at a time. Use the model as a guide to suggest the right next steps, and essentially to create a roadmap that, given where we are, we should do these 2 or 3 things next. And if we get good at those, then here's the next things we should do, and so on and so on. So avoid overreaching. The second one is individual decisions from someone who's passionate about Kanban. I'm sorry, I'm at my house in Spain, and it's 1 o'clock here in Spain, so please excuse me. So individual decisions of a Kanban passionate, the result could be that there's just no buy-in, that someone who's perhaps a big fan, they've read all the books, they've watched all the videos, the webinars, everything they can consume, and they've got their own passions about things they want to make happen. The organization's not ready for it. They don't understand the purpose or the benefits. A lower maturity organization will not understand the benefits of more advanced risk management approaches. So, for example, capacity allocation by different work item type or different class of service in order to hedge different risks, perhaps the risk in the arrival rate pattern of requests that come during a year. A low maturity organization will not understand that. And the result will be that they'll resist it, they'll be frustrated, there'll be frustration on both sides, and progress will not be made, and it undermines the credibility and the trust that they have in their advisor, their coach, their consultant. Right, so the way we avoid this is we start with sources of dissatisfaction. And those of you who've taken basic Kanban training will understand that we teach this in the Kanban system design class. Solicit the reasons why people are dissatisfied with the current level of service. What is it? Or perhaps internally, why are you dissatisfied with your ability to deliver? What's getting in the way of doing a good job? And show how Kanban can help demonstrate benefits, right? That tackle the 1, 2, 3 most important dissatisfactions and fix those. And then the other ones get promoted, and one step at a time, fix one problem, then fix the next problem. And again, avoid overreaching. Third one of our mistakes to avoid, Kanban's being introduced only to replace some current method or way of working. That for whatever reason, we're unhappy with the way we work, and we feel that we need to somehow throw it out the window and install something new. And we've heard that Kanban might be a good thing to install, that it's fashionable, trendy, or it's got a good reputation, or other people are doing it, so we should follow them like sheep, lemmings. So we're going to replace our current way of working with Kanban, whatever that is. Personally, this particular dysfunction doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And some of the things we see here is the false summit plateau is the idea of we've done Kanban. We put a board on the wall, it has sticky notes on it. Now what? And this is a failure to really understand fundamentally what it's about. And the whole idea that Kanban is something you do to your existing process, that we limit the work in progress, we visualize it, we put in place some feedback mechanisms so that we might drive improvement. We start with what you do now. If someone says we're going to replace our current way of working with Kanban, they've got it completely wrong. They fail to understand. Sometimes we have a new boss, and the new boss feels they need a new process. Yeah, it's unfortunate that you have a stupid new boss. It's something that I've noticed in my career. It happens a lot in professional services, intangible goods, knowledge worker activities. New bosses arrive, and it's so easy to trash the old way of working and replace it with a new way. Even at the level of tooling, I have seen examples, like company-wide examples. New vice president arrived and said, oh, in my old job, we used Rally, and you're using version 1. And I don't understand this software, so let's just cancel that contract and install a whole new software. That person should never have been hired as a vice president. They are incompetent at that level. But the reality is that there are many people like that. So pragmatically, we have to deal with stupid new bosses who think they can install new processes. That wouldn't happen, for example, say with the general manager of a hotel. They wouldn't arrive and on day one say, however you've been running this business for the last years, we're just going to forget all of that and bring in the consultants and install a whole new way of working. That wouldn't happen. Instead, they would arrive and they would probably spend the first 6 weeks to 3 months just getting to know how the business worked, getting to know the people, the processes, the customers, understanding the business they'd been put in charge of, and perhaps some of the challenges they have, perhaps some problems they have. And then they might say, let's try and fix some of these things. But in knowledge worker industries, bosses are all too fast to throw out the old and bring in the new. And no one stops to ask, is there anything we're currently doing which is quite good that actually works? Because if that's true, we should keep it. But this tends to be based on overall disappointment with current solutions. That whatever we're currently doing, it's not good enough, and somehow we get this impression we have to throw out everything in order to fix it, and that's definitely not the Kanban way. Start with what you do now, identify your number one source of dissatisfaction, and do something about it. That's the Kanban way. So this quote, this piece of philosophy, be like water, it's actually from Bruce Lee, famous Chinese martial artist. But he's actually, Bruce Lee was from Seattle. And I lived there for over 20 years, so people associate Kanban as starting in Seattle. And with Lee's approach to be like water, it was the idea that water's very flexible. If a river's coming down a hillside or a mountain, if it runs into a rock, it goes around the rock. It doesn't run into the rock and, excuse me, Mr. Rock, you're in my way. I need to get you out of the way. It just goes around. And if we use that kind of a philosophy with change, whenever we run into an obstacle, our number one solution should be try to go around it. And we should adopt a flexibility. Bruce Lee said things like, you pour water into a cup, it becomes the cup. And he also talked about you might have a glass and it has so much water in it, and you should pour away that which you don't want and keep that what you do. So if you have things you're currently doing that you like, well, keep those. And things that you're currently doing that are not working, that you don't like, well, discard them, pour them away, and do something else. Number 4, and this is perhaps one of the top comments and complaints we get at the end of Kanban training. It's incredibly high-ranking feedback my manager should have been in this class. And the flip side of it is that you have managers who are not trained in Kanban. So despite the fact that for 20 years I've been promoting this as a management method, managers may think that Kanban is something they do to their employees. They impose it upon them. They impose the WIP limits, the visualization, whatever. It doesn't occur to them that perhaps their behavior has to change also. And perhaps it's trendy, it's a buzzword. People have heard that, organizations doing Kanban improve their productivity. Oh, that sounds good. We should do it. And a common problem that we see with a lot of managers in traditional IT organizations and also less mature organizations, that the managers often see themselves as dating agents or traffic cops. They manage a department. There's some work arriving in their department. Their job is to take that work and match it with a worker, set them up to go on a date together. Or the work is coming and they do understand that the work has to flow through their organization in some way or another, but they feel this desperate need to direct everything. So they're like the traffic cops, waving the work and directing it from one place to another, one worker to another. We really need managers to get out of that behavior and to recognize that they're empowering their workers to make their own choices. Our Kanban approach is evolutionary. Start with what you do now. Identify your number one dissatisfaction and do something about it. It's not a drastic, wholesale, throw everything out, replace it with a new thing. And really what we're asking managers to do is to do their job, to manage the environment that they're in and help using the knowledge the workers have to identify the number one problem and fix it. And then number two gets promoted. It becomes the new number one problem. And again, with the workers' help, figure out what's going wrong and do something about it. And we have lots of practices in Kanban to help do something about it, to enable effective management of your workflow. And moving away from being dating agents or traffic cops, focus on flow and delivery of customer valued work. And what's getting in the way of making that possible? Eliminate it. All right, mistake number 5, running on open loop with no feedback. And I see this incredibly frequently, particularly when organizations are talking about scaling agile. Because for 20 plus years, we've understood the idea that we have agile teams and we have team level methods like Scrum, and they have team level feedback mechanisms, retrospectives. But the team level may not be good enough to deliver customer valued work. So we need to scale, we need to be able to get many teams to cooperate together and collaborate in a way that a customer requested something, it cascaded through our organization as a set of different work requests. We did that work, we integrated it back into some final product, and we deliver it to the customer. Imagine we're at an advertising agency and a customer comes in and says, I want a new marketing campaign for my shampoo. And as a consequence of that, we ask copywriters to write the campaign, come up with the ideas. Perhaps it's a multifaceted campaign. It might be billboard adverts in print for newspapers and magazines. It could be online. It could be video for TV commercials. It could be audio for radio commercials, and so on. So one request is basically a whole portfolio of individual projects. And that cascades down into lots of other services: copywriting, photography, picture editing, graphic design, and so on and so on. The photography might involve a photo shoot on location. We might have to cast models. And in addition to that, therefore, we need makeup people and we need lighting people and so on. This massive cascading set of requests that integrates back into a complete marketing campaign for the customer. Well, we might have team level feedback, but do we have workflow level feedback? Do we have customer valued work, enterprise level feedback? And often that's missing. No, often's the wrong way to put it. Almost every company I meet, that is missing. And then they'll say to me, you know, we're trying to be agile, but things are not getting any better. They're not getting better because they don't have any feedback mechanisms. So they're running on open loop, and there may be actions that just are never completed, but nobody notices because there's no feedback. Repetitive problems, things that go wrong again and again and again, and they never get fixed because there's no feedback. Or stalled initiatives, things that we'd love to be doing, but no one's actually paying attention to how long they're taking, and the energy is drained out of it. And again, there's no feedback to re-energize it. So any feedback mechanism, and you're all familiar with feedback mechanisms. I assume that you all live in houses with relatively modern appliances, and therefore somewhere in your house you have a thermostat. And in the old days, there used to be a little dial that you would set to maybe 21 Celsius. Nowadays, it's probably a up and down buttons. 21 Celsius. Okay, fantastic. You want the inside of the house to be 21 Celsius. And that sets the target, the outcome that you want. And now your heating system, your heating, ventilation, air conditioning system will adjust. It will do stuff. It will turn on the heating and pump hot water through your radiators, or it will turn on the air conditioning and blow cold air through your house. And it will cause the temperature in the rooms to adjust, and there'll be a sensor, a thermostat that will detect that, and it will compare with your target, and then it will decide, should we heat up or cool down? And we'll make an adjustment. That's a feedback mechanism. So we need to decide what outcomes we want. There needs to be someone who's accountable and responsible, and that someone is in a leadership position with a managerial level of job title. And we need to close the loop. We need to have some venue where we talk about how are things going, what was our objective, the outcome we wanted, what's actually happened, what's the gap between those? And if there is a gap, what do we do about it? And then action needs to be taken. An act of leadership has to happen. So we need to have some stress in our environment, some target we need to hit, some objective or outcome that we want. And we need to have some way of taking action and collecting information and feeding that back. There needs to be a feedback mechanism. And we compare the feedback we've got with the target we had. And if there's a gap, an act of leadership is required. And if those things don't exist in your organization, you won't make progress. I met a very large online travel company based here in Europe, and I'd been working with them on and off over several years. And at one point, they talked to me about an attempt they were having to scale, that they had reorganized the company into customer journeys because they had a new vice president on the business side who was very aware of customer experience. But they were struggling to organize themselves in an agile way to deliver these customer journeys and to implement Kanban at the customer journey level. And I asked them some very simple questions. You know, what represents the right outcome? Who's responsible and accountable for taking that customer's order for a new customer journey and delivering it? And do they have customer journey level feedback mechanisms? And the answer to all three questions was no, no, and no. And then they wondered why things were not getting better. Actually wasn't very difficult to fix this problem. So, number 6, no buffers and work in progress limits. Right, so people are doing Kanban, they put a board on the wall, some sticky notes, some visualization, but they don't actually have a Kanban system with work in progress limits. No WIP limits. Any task can be put in the process at any time, so it's basically a push system. There's no buffers. Everything's in progress because we said yes to everything. And as a consequence, we're overburdened. Our delivery mechanisms are unpredictable. They're very slow. We're untrustworthy as a consequence. And the more we're untrustworthy, the more the customers want to push. So simple Kanban mechanisms, we need to fix this. Introduce initial WIP limits. And you might start just with individual WIP limits, limits on individual people so that people are not overburdened. Don't worry so much about the system, at least in the early days. A lower maturity organization should focus on individual WIP limits. And install some buffers and visualize the work that's available for pull. Have some definition of ready. What does it mean to be ready for something to be started, something that we can consider to pull on our Kanban board? And create some policy around it. Make that explicit. That what needs to be true before you can pull something onto the board or from one stage to the next. Number 7, don't have any metrics. So another great mistake is not to measure anything. Then feedback mechanisms don't work so well when you don't measure things because you rely on opinion. And now we've got a room full of people with different opinions about things. Makes it very tense to drive a feedback mechanism. Instead, you know, we really need to focus on actually some fairly basic things, right? So we do Kanban because there's no metrics, right? That's maybe a favorite quote. There are many other similar ones like that. Metrics being treated previously as the means to punish employees. So we hate metrics because they've been used as a way of punishing us in the past. A way of measuring individuals, perhaps, and then punishing them for a lack of productivity. Or at completely the other end of the scale, there's just a simple lack of mathematical literacy. We're not afraid of metrics necessarily, but we've just no clue how to go about doing it. So very basic things. Start with lead time. And this is not difficult. You do this in your ordinary life. Imagine that you're ordering a new sofa for your living room or a bed for your bedroom. Perhaps the Christmas holidays are coming up and family are coming to stay at your house over the holidays and you need somewhere for them to sit. Well, it's a fairly basic question. How far in advance do I need to go to the furniture store and place my order so that my new sofa arrives before Christmas and grandma can sit on it watching the TV on Christmas Day? I sometimes also refer to this as the wedding cake problem. If you're getting married, how far in advance do you need to order the wedding cake from the bakery? We can all do this, and we do it in our everyday lives every week, probably. We have to think of these kind of problems. Lead time is not a difficult metric. You start the clock ticking when you commit to doing something, and the clock stops when it's ready for delivery to your customer. And if a new customer comes along and says, how long will it take you to do something similar to the thing you just did for the previous people? You've got some historical data. And if you're just doing basic Kanban, a board on the wall with some sticky notes, when you pull the ticket onto the board, you write the date on it. And when it gets to the other end of the board, you write the date on it. You subtract one date from the other, and that's the lead time. This is not difficult stuff. And your customers will have a certain tolerance for how long something should take, and you expect to deliver within that tolerance. So use metrics often during retrospectives to plan improvement. If you can deliver fast enough, faster than your customers expect, you don't have to improve. You have to improve if sometimes your delivery takes way longer than your customers expect. And you need basic instrumentation so that you can make objective decisions. Number 8, no cadence to review and improve. So we talked about feedback mechanisms. Well, what if we did it on a regular basis? Right. So we're trying Kanban because we have too many meetings, and therefore the whole idea that maybe we need another meeting to talk about feedback, that could be scary. And if you don't know too much about Kanban, obviously there's no meetings in Kanban. Right? And perhaps you have historical bad experience with time wasted in meetings because the meetings are for what? Collecting status. You don't need that if you have a Kanban board on the wall. Want the status? Go look. On the other hand, meetings where we're going to make decisions, where we're going to talk about how well are we doing, where we're going to decide whether we need to improve or not. These are critical to the feedback mechanism. Our feedback mechanisms need a venue, and therefore we do need meetings. Why do we need to add extra meetings? Probably we don't. What if we take an existing meeting, ensure it happens on a regular cadence, and use that meeting for a valuable purpose, a feedback mechanism to drive improvements? And this picture shows the basic feedback mechanisms that have some regular cadence in the Kanban method. The daily Kanban meeting in front of the board, the weekly replenishment meeting, pulling new work into the board. Perhaps every other week, the planning of a delivery, things you're going to flush off your board and deliver to the customer. Some regular retrospective for that workflow. The service delivery review, perhaps weekly or every 2 weeks, bi-weekly. Things that might happen less often, a risk review. The operations review, this is at a higher level of scale. The interaction between our service and many other enterprise services. And again, perhaps that's monthly. And then our strategy review, are we offering the right services? Are we doing the right things? And perhaps quarterly is often enough for that. But doing these things on a regular cadence means that it becomes predictable, and the rate that we're collecting, the period of time we collect feedback and the rate that we're reacting to it can be tuned accordingly. We don't want to do it too often. That would be pampering, be over reacting, moving too quickly. And we don't want to do it too seldom, because sometimes we do need to intervene. We do need to make a change, and we already know that we should do it. So if we have to wait another 3 months, another 6 months or something, it's too long. So the idea that the frequency, the cadence of what we're doing should be tuned to the information arrival in the environment, not too often and not too seldom. We don't want to be underdamped and doing it too often. We don't want to be overdamped and not doing it often enough. And these are recommendations based on real world experience. Number 9, no rules or policies. Of course, this is a complete mistake. People don't know what to do when decisions should be taken, hence they avoid making a decision, or everyone does whatever they want. We actually need to make policies explicit. It's a core practice in the Kanban method. And writing down, if you like, the rules of the game that we're currently playing, not only is it important, but often these things are they're not explicit and they're not well understood in a shared fashion. So having a discussion about how do we currently do things? How do we make decisions? How does work flow? How do we decide when we should start something or not? How do we decide when something's ready for delivery? How do we decide if something should be given priority over something else? Write those rules down, make them explicit, develop a shared understanding. And last and certainly not least, the whole idea that there's probably hidden work. There's things that aren't visible, they're not on the board, we're not tracking them. Right, so the board isn't visualizing our full process. Maybe it's only the middle. There's a whole bunch of stuff up front that happens and stuff that happens later. Well, we need to expand that board. It's just one small task. I can do it quickly. Why should I waste time creating a ticket for it? Well, that's fine if it's only one, but if it's a few hundred small tasks, maybe it's 20, 30, 40, 50% of your workload. And if I'm your manager and half of what you're doing is invisible, then how can I help you as your manager? How can I be an effective help leading the organization if half of what we're doing is invisible? And I don't know what our process is. Lower maturity organizations, the whole process is opaque. Lower maturity organizations, teams can be doing work and they don't know who it's for. They don't know why they're doing it. They're just working on a task and it's soul destroying. Right. So let your process emerge through discovering the activities to deliver the work. Visualize the impact. And if the work's done outside your team or service, use a separate board, use some parking lot, have a way of tracking stuff that you need that other people are working on. So, summarize these 10 things, and I'm sure we could have made a much longer list. Pavel asked for 10, so we got 10. Right. We had overreaching, trying to do something too advanced your organization's not ready for. Individual decisions of a Kanban passionate person. In other words, it's their pet thing, and it's not textually tuned to what you need. Focus on solving your number one dissatisfaction and then move to the next one. Kanban introduced only as a way to replace your current way of working. It's completely wrong-headed. You do Kanban to your existing way of working in order to make it better. Don't throw out what you've got. You keep what's there and what's working. Managers not trained in Kanban or indeed recognizing that management decision-making is a key thing that needs to change. Then we have running an open loop, no feedback. Again, something managers, leaders in an organization should be thinking in systems and creating feedback mechanisms. And a failure to have feedback, it's impossible to improve. No buffers and WIP limits. So there's no stress on what should we be doing now, what should wait until later, and if so, when, or what shouldn't be done at all. We need to put that in place. No metrics. We can't really manage and drive effective feedback mechanisms without some basic metrics. And the basic metrics are really basic. They're not difficult. There's no excuse. No cadences. Feedback mechanisms need to run on a regular cadence, and we should tune the frequency to the arrival rate of new information so that we're not overreacting to just one or two data points, but we have enough to make the right decision without waiting too long. No policies. We need to make the rules of the game explicit. We need to understand how we work and how we make decisions and share that understanding with our entire team. And any new employees who come, they can learn quickly how the work works. And finally, hidden work. We need to expose that. You can't expect your managers and the leaders in your organization to be effective and to help you effectively if a large quantity of what you do is invisible. Unless we can make it visible to them and put policy around it and collect data on it with metrics and instrument it, they won't be able to help you. And you can learn a lot more about all of this stuff on kmm.plus. There's a free level of subscription, although you can pay a little money every month to get access to a lot more information. And our own business website, ejaa.com, the David J. Anderson School of Management. There's lots of material on there and information about all of our training classes. And I think that's a good point for us to stop sharing and take some questions.
Thank you very much, David, for all the points and all the lessons. And guys, this is a time for ask questions, David mentioned.
Too shy to ask.
Okay, I have
yeah,
one.
I was going to say
Hello?
a very shy Polish group here.
Yeah, I have one question, maybe for the beginning. How to recognize, sorry, this is my daughter, she also wants to be a Scrum Master in the future. So my question is how to recognize when Kanban can be useful. Do you have some tips?
Yeah, so the contextual appropriateness, we teach this in some of the more advanced coaching classes, that because we don't want coaches, consultants, so on, walking into a place and saying, "Oh, you should do Kanban just for the heck of it." But some general advice. basic mechanics of a Kanban system, if you have a WIP limit, the whole idea of we start what we need to do now because it has some immediate cost of delay, we defer other things till later because they're not so urgent, and we don't do some things at all because they're not valuable. Well, the question would be whether that's relevant in your environment. So does deferred commitment give you an advantage? Is there uncertainty about your future, or can you commit early to things or not? Right. So that's one basic thing. Where deferred commitment will give you an advantage, you're going to get a benefit from Kanban. Then, do you have a leader who is impatient and they're in a hurry, they're a revolutionary, they want to throw everything out and install a whole new thing? Well, that person's not going to have the patience to do Kanban. And if you try to do this very patient, little by little approach, they'll run out of patience and maybe you'll get fired. So you need to look at the leader who's in charge and decide, are they a revolutionary or not? Are they this low maturity hero leader who needs to make this grand gesture and have a big victory, and this sticks to them as the great hero leader? Because in a Kanban environment, things get gradually better and almost no one notices, and it certainly doesn't get attributed to the leader. So that's inappropriate. Anya, I need you to remind me the other couple of things from that.
Overburdening.
Yeah, so if we're in an environment where people are overburdened, we start too many things, we say yes to too much, there's too much multitasking, then Kanban will give you an immediate benefit. There's mechanical benefits of a WIP limited system, deferred commitment, and overburdening. And
yeah, and the fourth one is, are people likely to resist change emotionally, rejecting forced changes?
Yeah, so the first two are really mechanical, to do with the mechanism of a Kanban system. And then we have these much more social and psychological ones. If you're introducing large wholesale changes in an organization, structural changes, are people just going to buy into that, or are they going to resist? And in what manner will that resistance happen? And if we're fairly sure they are going to resist, and the resistance is often quite passive aggressive, which is difficult to detect in a knowledge worker environment. So old-fashioned guidance from old-fashioned physical companies, managed by walking around. Walk around and talk to people, get to know them, watch what's going on. So imagine you do that in a software company, or I used to work at a telephone company, lots of people doing software for their website. If I managed by walking around, I would find half of my programming team playing ping pong at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Is that good or bad? How the hell would you know? Are they playing ping pong because they hate their manager and it's a horrible environment where they're set up for failure? They all know they're going to fail, so they may as well go and play ping pong. Or are they playing ping pong at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because they're completely exhausted from working all day really hard on a project that they totally believe in? So old-fashioned guidance on like, how do you detect people are resisting? Doesn't work. You have to understand people and say, well, if we come along and say we're changing your job title, how many people do you know that like that idea? Very few. So anything of that nature, anything that's structural from a social perspective, you get a new job title, new role, new responsibilities, anything that changes the social structure is inherently threatening to about 80% of the workforce. And on the other hand, if you come along and say, we're going to start with what we do now. Nobody gets a new job title. No one gets new role or responsibility. We'd like to hear what your sources of dissatisfaction are, and we'll try and identify the most important one and fix it. The vast majority of the workforce is going to be on board with that. So if deferred commitment will help you, or relief from overburdening will help you, or people are going to resist in some shape or fashion, and you want to avoid that, or you've got a patient, more mature leader who's willing to do things bit by bit, then all of those is an appropriate context for using Kanban. And if you don't have those things, either you're wasting your time or you're going to make changes that don't make a big difference. It's a great question.
Okay, thanks. I just joined to my company and I'm watching them, how they work right now, my team. And I was thinking about Kanban, so this advice is good because I have a patient leader and they really want to change. And I noticed that it's now the work is not organized very well, so they want to change. Yes, and I said maybe Kanban. Yes, let's do that. And I said okay. Yeah, if it works, we want it, and we want to change. Yes, right now. When will be a training or something like that? And the second, my question about what is about how in online times make a good training to show the benefits of Kanban, to show if it's fit for us.
Anya, do you want to answer that?
I mean, we are doing only online trainings right now, so for like 3 years or so. So, and they are working somehow. So, how to do a good training? First, I mean, I'm not going to say anything like super innovative here. So, a lot of exercises, a lot of workshops, a lot of small exercises that will help people to work on. Usually we try to work like both ways, especially this lower level training like Kanban system design, so that people can work on some case studies that we provide to them, but then they have a chance immediately to apply it to their own cases. So for example, if we do static, we work on exciting case study, but then step by step, people also kind of repeat the steps on their own cases. And this is how we are trying to mix some ready case studies that we already have for people with something that people bring to us. So to have this kind of mixed experience.
The essence of it is that our training is designed to be very experiential. So it immerses people in what it feels to be doing Kanban. And they should leave the class feeling that they felt what it's like to work in a Kanban environment. And it's very experiential, and it's more like a workshop where you're working on your own situation and learning to use the Kanban approach to understand your own situation, and leaving the class with a set of suggestions for improvements in a Kanban system design, something that's immediately actionable. And it took a long time to develop that class format. As Anya said, we've been doing it online since the pandemic, so that's over 3 years. But the concept of how we teach the classes dates back to about 2010. And I always believed that the classes had to be experiential and people had to leave with some actionable advice. It has to feel more like a workshop that happened in your own premises with your own team. I thought maybe someone else was going to ask a question, and then they went quiet for a moment to let Carolina talk.
I have two questions. Maybe a very popular one, but what is your best approach to marking Kanban the small little tasks, as you mentioned? And there are many of them, but it's longer to put them in Jira, for example, than do it. And second one, how to deal with sequentially task like every week report or something like this.
Okay, the second question is quite easy, and the historical answer for that, if we were using a physical Kanban board, you make a ticket, a standard ticket for this recurring task, and you laminate it in plastic so you can write on it with the pen and then rub it off. So the ticket goes on the board and it works its way across, and then at the end of the week or whatever the frequency, it rotates around and you just clean it again and put the ticket back in. And perhaps the ticket design tells you how frequently it happens, like once a week or once a month or something. So that regularly recurring task problem. And then there might be some capacity allocation for that there's a known arrival rate or basically a known volume of the regular task. So you might have a row on the board, especially for those. So these laminated cards go on one end, they work their way across and they rotate around and they just keep doing this from 1 week to the next or 1 month to the next. Sorry, remind me the first question.
Small task.
Yes, right. So the small tasks, I think when I wrote the book, which 13 years ago, I defined a small task as anything that takes less than an hour. And that was based on this observation that things that take less than an hour, people don't want to put them on the board. They don't want to write a ticket for it and so on. Well, we've seen some novel ways of solving that problem over the years. There's a case study we have. Actually, we don't have it. It's Klaus Leopold published it, so it's only in German. But it's one of his clients that I visited in Vienna. They were an advertising agency, and they had a lot of these small task problems. So, for example, say their graphic design department, they're working on designing the layout for a print advert. But during the time when they're doing that, the phone keeps ringing and they pick the phone up and they answer some questions from account managers or clients or whoever it might be. Every time that happens, they took a small bookmark post-it note, the tiny ones you use for bookmarking, and they're usually fluorescent color, and they stuck them onto the monitor of their computer. And if the phone call lasted more than 15 minutes, they took another one and they stuck it on. And at the end of every day, there was a project manager who went around and collected all these little tickets and then entered the data into a spreadsheet. Another case study that we do have, but it's also a Klaus Leopold client, they had big plastic tubes, and they had those in the room where the Kanban board was. And every time they did a small task, they went and collected a ping pong ball, and the ping pong balls had different colors for different types of task. And they drop the ball into the tube. And then maybe once a week or once a month, they harvest they pull the balls out of the tube and they count them up. So they were able to analyze the bandwidth that the small tasks were consuming. They weren't tracking them in detail, but they were tracking the impact that they were having on the total capacity.
Thanks.
I may have a similar question, if I may, and that's related to transparency that you mentioned, which is, of course, very important. But I've noticed that in some teams, that there is this tendency to put everything on the board just to show how busy you are. And the question is about what is it actually that is worth putting on the board? Should this be only work items that are related to some kind of an outcome, or a meeting that you have in calendar just to see how busy you are? Because in my world, that is actually creating more noise instead of transparency. And moreover, it also depletes the WIP limit that you have on your board. If you put a lot of items that makes no sense, but simply show that you are busy.
Some attempt to game the system or disrupt just overwhelm it. We're coming up to the 20th anniversary of my first book, which was called Agile Management for Software Engineering. And it was the first ever book in the whole world of IT that talked about flow and the whole idea of workflow and work item types and bottlenecks and everything else that comes from the idea of customer asked for something and now it's going to flow through a set of activities until it's ready to be delivered. Until then, that concept did not exist. So, looking back now, it's really freaky because we all take it for granted. But I had to spend a lot of time and energy in that book trying to explain that the concept of a workflow and value-adding activities and that create information or new knowledge and justify that as a concept. Now everyone takes it for granted. So I've been doing this for 20 years, and the advice that I gave back then isn't different. The stuff you should be tracking is stuff that your customer would recognize. And if I'm your manager, which I was then, and since then more as senior positions, but if I'm the manager, all I care about is what did our customer ask for and where is it? Because if the customer comes to me and says, David, when will my thing be ready? I want to be able to give them an answer. Meanwhile, the tasks that you as an individual, whether you're a developer or a tester or an analyst or user experience person or someone on my staff that reports up to me, I do not care. Your individual Kanban board can be in the privacy of your own cubicle, and I'm never going to come and look at it because I don't care. So, on the other hand, is there a value in individual Kanban? Yes. I'm sure that individuals find it a good way to help them, keep their work under control and so forth. So the idea of some sort of task list that may include attending certain meetings, well, fair enough at the individual level, but from a managerial level, from a workflow service delivery Kanban level, no, we don't care. And I think a critical thing in our Kanban system design training is the whole idea of defining a work item type. What does it mean to be a work item that is worthy of tracking? And years ago, so 2010, the very early Kanban software products, the vendors there, the founders of those companies would say to me, the number one thing that our customers struggle with is defining what a ticket means. Because they wanted to make the tickets tasks or issues or bugs or whatever the heck, that typical issue tracking, bug tracking type systems had done in the past. But actually what we really want are customer valued items. If your customer can't recognize the ticket on the board, why the heck are you tracking it? So I think you answered your own question already.
Yeah, thank you.
Before the next questions, I don't know, guys, if you see Q&A, but in the Q&A, I dropped the link to Kanban books where you can download lessons in Agile Management for free. So go and just do it.
Well, the lessons in Agile Management, that's a newer thing, right? That was in 2012, a collection of my blog posts. But the Agile Management for Software Engineering, we didn't publish it. It's Prentice Hall, which is Pearson. And it's still available, but the 20th anniversary is coming up. So we're going to talk to them about some sort of way of celebrating that, and whether or not that will make the book more available at an affordable price. We'll see. The thing is, it was the first book I wrote. It's not my best writing, right? Good content, crappy writing. I'm a much better writer nowadays.
Okay, and on chat we have a question. Any mistakes or anti-patterns related to shifting from other methods to Kanban?
We probably have a long list of these, don't we, Anya? I think the key thing is always, it kind of doesn't matter what you currently do. We start with what you do now, and then you add Kanban to that environment, and you start gradually fixing the problems. The thing that comes up again and again, and particularly with Scrum, I think particularly because the Scrum leadership have always sold it as some sort of cult or religion, often the prescription, the defined method, and your environment and your circumstance, they're different. So there's elements of what's in the prescriptive defined method that don't work in your environment. And the people pushing those methods want you to stick to the definition. And if you move off the definition, well, I've washed my hands of your situation, I'm Pontius Pilate, and off you go. It's, all the problems are your problems. Well, if you're introducing Kanban in the environment, you're doing it because your existing way of working isn't satisfying you completely. And as a consequence, stuff's going to have to change. So what I see as a recurring problem is Kanban makes people aware of what they need to change, and it usually suggests how they need to change it. And then, oh, you don't like that. Many years ago, there was a blog post of a case study. It was written by a guy who's still very famous and quite high ranking in the Scrum community, called Charles Suschek. And it pretty much amounted to, we did Scrum in this organization and it was quite good, but it didn't solve all our problems. Then we introduced Kanban into the organization and we quadrupled the productivity of the company. Right, so it's like a 1,500 word blog post, 500 words on this. This is what we did and why it was not working. 500 words on we introduced Kanban and it quadrupled the productivity. And the remaining 500 words were all about why he didn't like that outcome and what was wrong with Kanban. Right? Scrum religious zealot. And I think that's the number one issue with, if you've got your own existing way of working and you're thinking of changing it and introducing Kanban, it's because it's not doing everything for you. And you have to be willing to move on, to let it go. And if you get dogmatic about it, I can't help you.
Thank you. Next question.
I have two questions. First one, because we have spoken about the lower limit of the task on the Kanban board, but what about the maximum duration of the task? Because I have introduced Kanban for in the second organizations, and I have the same problem that there is the resistance for the team to put the task with the duration. I can really rely on the final result, on the final due date of the task. And the second question I would have: what do you think about that some kind of on hold column in the Kanban board? Because sometimes we have tasks when, for example, we are waiting for the customer to give some additional information which is required, and then that kind of task which is already started can impact our WIP limit. So it is unhealthy for the Kanban board, I would say.
Yeah, let's deal with the second one first. So the whole idea of an on-hold column is, I think that's widely regarded as an anti-pattern, and it's not very long ago, pretty recently. I'm sure that I saw Sonia Sidorova of Nave publish an article about that as an anti-pattern. It's because the whole idea of on hold doesn't exist in the workflow. If something's on hold, mark it as blocked and track the fact that it's blocked. Or if it's on hold for a very specific recurring reason, like a dependency, then maybe you have a parking lot. So it's not a column, but it's a space, a parking space, and you move it into the parking space. Now, the question of whether it should count against the WIP limit or not is primarily a question of the maturity of the organization and the dependency that's involved. If you use a real world example for a moment, we're working on an ad campaign for an ad agency and we need to get new photography done. And our photographer is going to, maybe we're selling cake. So we need to get some of the cakes and get new images made for the campaign. And our photographer is very reliable. And he's not overburdened, so he's easy to schedule. And when we send a request to the photographer, he might say, okay, I'm free next Thursday. I'll do the photo shoot. You'll have the results on Monday. And that's a pretty typical lead time, a week and a half, something like that, 2 weeks. In that case, why can't we have a WIP limit? A WIP limit for how many requests we're willing to send to that photographer within their capacity. But if our dependent service is unreliable, then making a WIP limit is just going to create too much stress. So typically we visualize a parking lot in the first instance, and then maybe you start visualizing how many days has the thing been parked, how many days is it blocked. Perhaps we raise that at an operations review meeting and say, look, we've got all this work that's queuing for you guys and you're not servicing us. And you need to step your game up. We want you to deliver back to us within 2 weeks. So now we have a service level agreement. Well, you're going to break that agreement because you're not good enough yet. So now we're tracking how many days blocked. And if you break the service level agreement, now we put a pink sticker on it and you've broken the SLA. And when we get to operations review, we show up and you say, here are the 10 tickets that broke the SLA this month. And that puts more pressure on the other service and gradually they get better. And if they get better to the point they can deliver within the SLA, then we can have a WIP limit. So having a parking space rather than a blocked column, or just simply marking blocked tickets as blocked and having some policy around how many are allowed to be blocked. But whether we're having a WIP limit on these dependencies or not is related to the maturity of the organization and how well the dependent services service us. So the best guidance is just to start by visualizing the blockers and collecting the information, and then sharing that information at some feedback mechanism. Don't stress the system too much. It's enough to stress it with, hey, look at all this blocked shit. Now, if you actually have a WIP limit, that will create too much stress. And that's actually, it's quite an advanced skill, right? It's not something I expect beginners to be good at. It's something I expect Kanban coaching professionals and accredited Kanban consultants to be capable of advising you wisely. That knowing how much stress can we put on an organization based on, I've arrived, I've looked around, I've observed you guys, I've got some opinion about the maturity of the organization. Maturity relates to resilience. Resilience relates to stress. Someone who's an individual with very low resilience, you can't stress them at all and they have a meltdown. Any of you who are parents of small children will understand this, right? But a more mature, more resilient person, you can stress them quite a lot and they keep going. And it's the same with organizations. So putting a WIP limit on your blockers will create stress, and only do it if you've got a mature organization that's very resilient.
Thank you. The question might be from my side, David. How much time do you have? Because
well, I could stay another 5-10 minutes, maybe.
Okay.
It's still daylight here in Spain, right? I'm in the same time zone as you guys, but it's not even dinner time here yet.
Okay, so let's try 1 or 2 more questions. Unless there are none.
Well, I know it's.
I had
it's
the
late in
second
evening.
questions, and I put this as a first. What about this very long tasks when the team member does not want to split in the smaller parts in order to be able to visualize the progress on the.
That's a great question. Yeah. I haven't heard it for a long time, but it's a great question, and it used to come up a lot in the early years for us. One of the issues is a very long-running task, and if you don't have any breakdown on it, you sort of move it on the board and it sits there for 5 or 6 months, and there's no movement. So what's the point in a daily meeting or even a weekly meeting if the ticket never moves? Because if the ticket doesn't move, there's no new information. And nobody wants to attend a meeting with no new information. If you have a Kanban meeting and everyone's like, well, the tickets are all where they were last week. Why are we here? So there is a need for the granularity of whatever you're tracking to be at the level where you see some movement. Now, you might have say a portfolio level board or some kind of account management level board where it's a big ticket. It might take us months to put together the client's advertising campaign. And at the portfolio level, maybe the ticket got started But there must be some breakdown of that as it cascades through other activities and different services in the organization, which are much finer grained, smaller, that we can track and they will move faster. And the other solution that we've seen at portfolio level since really the early years, 2009, I presented this at the Agile conference in the United States. You can have a big fat column. So you've got your input queue, and then you've got your doing, and then done on this side. Well, ticket moves on here, and it's started. And as time goes by, it gradually slides across the board until it gets to the other end. Because even at a very low fidelity, and there's a case study on our website from an Austrian company called Tupelo, and they did Kanban on their product development, but they introduced Kanban into their marketing and their community development part of the business. And in the very beginning, all they could do was talk about to do, doing, and done. But the doing part might take 6 months because it was a marketing campaign or some community development in some city in Europe. So the ticket, they made a big fat column and they would slide the ticket across. And the way they decided where to put the ticket, they were having their weekly phone call and they would say something like, so the best gelato in Barcelona competition, where are we with that? And the owner of it might say, oh, I think it's about 60% complete. So they would move the ticket 3/5 of the way across the column and just stick it there. Entirely opinion-based, not objective, no metrics or anything, but it's better than nothing. So the long-running tasks, the fat column and slide it across, even if it's just opinion-based for where should it be. And then over time, perhaps you put in place some instrumentation and you get more objective about where it is. And ideally, that request gets broken down into other requests that get sent to maybe other Kanban boards, and you can track them. And they do move more frequently.
If I may comment that I've used something like that. Everything what you said before when we were using standard whiteboards in the physical office, but working in Jira and on statuses in Jira, it's a little bit more complex to implement these ideas.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the quality of the tooling is so bad. And my observation is that the product managers at these tool companies are so arrogant. And that's the reason the tools don't have the features you guys need, even after, say, 15 years of real people using these features, is because of the arrogance of the product managers. And it's been an ongoing problem. And the bigger the company and the richer they are, and Atlassian are definitely the biggest and the richest, the greater the arrogance. So the feature I just described does exist in Swift Kanban. And a slight variation, it doesn't work in the same way, but it performs the same outcome, is also in Kanbanize. So the really good Kanban software tools do these features. And the other tools could easily have done it, but they didn't value it because the product managers were arrogant and they thought they knew better. Where, in my opinion, if you want to know what your software should do, you should watch what real people are doing and copy it. But apparently, that's the sort of product management advice that does not show up in any books.
Okay, the last chance to ask the question and take an opportunity to talk to David.
So I may have another one. And that one is related to personal WIP limits that you also mentioned, David. And the question is, how do you address the risk of people actually not helping out their teammates when you set personal WIP limits and then a team is focusing on working or finishing a work item, but someone says, oh, sorry, I cannot help you on that because I will exceed my personal WIP limit. So you need to wait until I finish my items in order for me to help you out. That is happening. So that is a real case scenario.
All right. So we've seen some good solutions for that over the years. The Tupelo case study has has an example, right? So explicit policy around how many things you can work on yourself and the expectation that you have to help other people. So Tupelo used it's a relatively common implementation. If you've got a workflow board, but you also want to have individual limits for the people, you implement some avatars, or maybe the first ever implementation we saw was at a Dutch company in Netherlands insurance, and they made little magnets where I've forgotten the technology, where you like stamp out the letters of your name. This is a thing my mother used to do with the back of my jackets, print my name on it and stick it onto the clothes. They used that technology. Does anyone remember what that's called? You print the plastic strip with the letters. So they would stick that on a magnet with the person's name, and then they put the magnets on the board next to the tickets. But at Tupelo, what they did was they had the employees go, it was a website where you could design your own South Park characters. So they would have people design a little South Park avatar of themselves. And then printed them out, and they had big ones and they had little ones. And they put magnets on the back of them. And the standard policy was one big one and two little ones. A big one is where you own the ticket and you're working on it, and the two little ones are where you're helping someone else, and your personal WIP limit is 3, but it's 1 for you and 2 helping. So by creating some explicit policy around, we expect collaboration, we expect people to help, you can potentially solve that problem. So we saw that multiple times over the years with more or less the same implementation done in different ways. But of course, underpinning that, it has to be a cultural norm. It has to be a value. People need to agree that, yes, I have my own stuff to do, but as a team member, as an employee here, I'm also expected to contribute to others, and we're going to put some explicit policy around that, and I'll respect that. Right? If people buy into the concept and the value, then the mechanism is trivial.
Mm-hmm. And that is a great answer. So thank you for that, because actually making it a part of our policies is something that the whole team should respect, right? So that is, yeah, exactly. So thank you for the answer again.
It's my pleasure. And once again, I've learned so much from doing these things. The great lesson from tonight is things we'd forgotten from 10, 12 years ago are still super important, and we need to spend more time amplifying all these, because pretty much every question, they're all fantastic and great questions. And it felt to me like 10, 12 years ago that we were answering these. The cases and examples I've given you are all more than a decade old. So it's really made me realize that we forget as an organization, and I individually forget what we already know, and that so many of these things are really important and helpful. So thank you to Pavel and for inviting me, Anya for creating the presentation, and thanks for all of you for coming and sharing your evening with me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, exactly. So thank you very much for all your questions, and David, once again for your time that you dedicated to be with us. And I think I'm frozen.
Yes,
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, I'm back. So once again, thank you everybody for taking time with us, and thank you David for dedication your time, especially to share your experience the wider you can imagine with us and answer all the questions. Thank you very much.